This is an extraordinarily challenging time. A global pandemic disproportionately harming and killing people of color, persistently high unemployment levels among low-wage workers, a president continuously stoking division and racism, using dog whistles to scare people about the very concept of housing our lowest income neighbors. And on top of a decades-long housing crisis, most harming extremely low-income people and people of color, we now have the newer threat of a tsunami of evictions when the CDC eviction moratorium expires this winter. It's very clear that if Congress doesn't act and act soon, we will face a housing and homelessness crisis in Texas and across the country unlike any we've seen in our lifetime. If nothing else, this pandemic drives home the truth that housing is healthcare. We won't truly contain the pandemic as long as hundreds of thousands of people are unhoused and unsheltered, and especially if we allow millions more people to lose their homes. So we have to do all that we can to prevent this wave of evictions. We have to work together and continue pushing Congress and the White House to implement a broad moratorium on all evictions for non-payment of rent for the duration of the pandemic, and to pair it with at least $100 billion in emergency rental assistance. We have to push them to provide $11.5 billion in funds for homeless shelter and service providers to keep people experiencing homelessness safe and healthy and to get them housed as quickly as possible. We can't accept anything other than success in this effort because the consequences of failure are too dire. And I know that we will be successful because of what we've already achieved together during the pandemic. When this crisis hit, homeless shelter and service providers, low-income renters, and their allies did inspirational and life-saving work. You worked to get unsheltered people moved quickly into safer settings. You worked to deconcentrate congregate shelters. Together we pushed Congress on the solutions and we achieved $12 billion in funding for housing and homelessness needs and a partial eviction moratorium. Cities and states are using those funds to create emergency rental assistance programs. We told the stories of people facing eviction and got the federal government to implement a much broader, even if imperfect, eviction moratorium. We are so powerful when we fight together, and we have more fights ahead of us. We have so much work to do, even beyond this immediate crisis. I often think about an incident that happened in Las Vegas early in the pandemic. A local homeless shelter had to shut down after one of its staff contracted the coronavirus. And in response, they moved all the people who had slept in that shelter onto open-air concrete slabs in a parking lot. These slabs were carefully placed 6 feet apart, and people slept on the concrete literally in the shadow of dozens of empty hotel buildings. And I think about this often and I share it with all of you because it encapsulates so many things about our country's ongoing failure to do anything meaningful about homelessness, about the cruel and often dehumanizing ways that communities treat people experiencing homelessness, and about the work that we have to do towards long-term solutions, because this immediate housing crisis we are working to prevent sits on top of a long-standing and pervasive shortage of homes for the lowest income people. We had an affordable housing crisis before COVID-19 in Texas and throughout the country, and we will have it still after COVID-19. Unless we're willing as a country to make the kind of substantial investments needed in long-term solutions to end homelessness and end housing poverty, then we will face a similar eviction and homelessness crisis again during the next pandemic, or the next wave of this pandemic, or the next natural disaster, or even just during the next year, because we still will not have solved for the underlying shortage of homes affordable to the lowest income people. Allowing homelessness and housing poverty to exist in our country has always been a public policy choice, and we can choose differently. We have the data, certainly we have the solutions. As a country, we have the resources. The only thing we lack, what we have always lacked, is the political will to fund the solutions at the scale necessary. And this moment, when it's never been more clear that housing is healthcare, helps us to build that political will to achieve change. So thank you for all that you do to house people in Texas. Thank you for your tremendous work and advocacy over these last incredibly challenging months. We can't stop now. We have so much work to do, but I am certain that together we can and we will end homelessness and achieve housing justice once and for all. Thank you.